Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to answer a few more of the really good questions that I've got in my comment section over the last week. And one of those questions was, why do you have these comic creators, these self-proclaimed feminist comic creators, who want to write stories by women, for women, about women heroes, and yet when they create these women heroes, they're not women at all. They have the shape of a woman, sometimes, but they're actually more masculine than any of the male comic heroes that are standing next to them. Why do they do that? And the other question was, why do these, again, self-proclaimed feminist comic creators, why do they feel a need to rob from boys and from men their traditional spaces, their traditional creative spaces like comics, and their traditional mediums like comics? Why can't they just share them? Why do they need to take them over or destroy them? And I think I can answer both of those questions at the same time. Now, the answer to those two questions I actually covered in one of my older videos back when I had like 200 subscribers. But instead of pointing you back to that old video where I rambled a little bit, I'm going to try to condense it down, and I'm going to add a bunch of new stuff that I've learned about comics since then. So the thing is that in order to answer this question, first I'm going to have to go into the philosophical, and then at the end I'll connect it all towards the comics, especially Marvel Comics, and how they produce heroes and stories right now. And one of the things is that I said last week, I'm not an expert in anything, and I will repeat that. I am not an expert in anything, but the stuff that I'm going to deal with today, I'm actually fairly comfortable dealing with, because it was one of the main focuses of one of my degrees, which was political theory. So I didn't study philosophy for philosophy itself. I had to study philosophy to see how it impacted the politics and the history of the last few hundred years. And so I do indeed feel a little bit comfortable, at the very least, speaking on this topic and going into the philosophical. So here's the thing. I got to go way back just for a minute. For the last at least 400 years, there's been a movement away from traditional truth, that is to say, away from objective truth towards a more subjective truth, where the thing is true because basically you either know it, like it, or believe it. There has been this shift, again, for at least 400 years. And it's not a new shift. People have been trying to do this since ancient times. This is what Plato would have argued against and said, this is when a man follows his own rather than what is true. But this whole movement, it culminated in one philosophy which I would say from my study would be the most influential philosophy of the last 150 years. And it is the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, if you've never studied Nietzsche, you would not see that his philosophy runs through so many things in our culture, in our Western culture today, just over and over again. But the thing is that it runs through everything in a subtle way, almost in a mask. And there's a reason for that, and I'll get into that in a minute. But to briefly go over the philosophy of Nietzsche and that of his predecessor, who was Schopenhauer, his philosophy is what nihilism comes from. And it basically states that there is no spiritual reality whatsoever. And because there's no spiritual reality whatsoever, there is no meaning to life whatsoever either. And it's not that you make your own meaning in life, like most people would say today to that problem. No, there is no meaning to life whatsoever. You are born in pain. You spend your life enduring pain until you're finally embraced by the sweet taste of death. That's all there is for life, and that's all you have to look forward to. Now, Schopenhauer would say that's it. There's no way around it whatsoever. However, Nietzsche would say that at the very least, you could mitigate that pain just a little bit by being creative through the will to power. And it's all about power. And that's the most bare bones summary of their philosophies that I can actually give. But it's really interesting when you step back and look at it not just as a philosophy, but in the political and historical context from which it came and where it was going. That gives you something entirely different. Because the thing is that if you look at the historical and how these two men actually conducted their lives, you will see a great difference between what they actually said and how they actually acted. So what that reveals is there was a meaning for them to come up with this philosophy, each of them, and it was separate from the things that they actually said. Because neither of these men, the two creators of their own philosophies, these two men could not even follow their own philosophies. They were just not able to. And so when you look at it, you'll see that they created these philosophies for another reason. And that reason would be to destroy all norms of morality whatsoever. They wanted to be able to do anything and everything that they wanted to do with no care to anyone else, and they didn't need morality standing in their way, and so they had to destroy it. And again, people have been doing this since Plato's time and before. If you look at his works, the same thing pops up there. You always have people trying to do this. And his philosophy, Nietzsche's philosophy, just was the perfect storm. He came about at a time when people just wanted to do this. They were ready. They were primed for the last 400 years to abandon truth and to do nothing but be self-serving. And so when his philosophy came along, people glommed onto it. They just thought this was the best thing ever because they could abandon all norms of morality and do just whatever they wanted to do. But there was a slight hitch to all of this, because both Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, his predecessor, when they created these philosophies, they were expressly only for men. Women were excluded completely. When Nietzsche talks about the Superman, he means a superman. Women were excluded. Both of these men hated women with a fiery passion that you've probably never even seen on the screen before. They hated women, and they saw them literally as below the slime of the earth. They thought of women as less than slime. They were the slime out of which men were created, and during their entire lives, all they sought to do was to prohibit and stop men from exercising their will to power. That's all that they did. So women were basically the enemy of men. That's the way their philosophies were created and set up. And it runs straight through both of their philosophies. But the thing is that since their philosophies took hold, and all of these men said, great, I can act by myself, for myself, not caring about anybody, not caring about morality, I'll go ahead and do that. You had a whole bunch of women saying, hey, wait a minute, we want that too. But we can't have that because we can't be Nietzschean. We can't follow his philosophy because it excludes women. And so what happened after that? Well, after that, you had a bunch of thinkers which I would call proto-feminists. They are the thinkers out of which feminism was derived. And these thinkers came up with their own philosophies so that they could follow Nietzschean's philosophy regardless of the fact that they were women. And there were men and women philosophers that did this. And the most influential idea that they created in order to do this was the erasure of the man-woman divide. They come up with their philosophies and basically laid out the fact that men and women are exactly the same, and men can become women, and women can become men. When you look around you today, does it sound familiar? But anyways, the reason why they wanted to do this was because they wanted to be able to turn women into men. And if they could turn women into men, then those women who are now men could then become Nietzschean and then get to do anything that they wanted and ignore all morality and everything that Nietzsche's philosophy actually lays out. But again, there was a slight hitch to this, and the slight hitch to this was the fact that biology gets in the way, and women aren't men. And this was back in a time when men were real men and women were real women. And even if you took a woman and tried to change them into a man, there's no way that they could even get to the bottom rung of what it was to be a man. So not only did they have to take women and make them more masculine, but they had to feminize the men as well. And once they did that, then you could have these women who are pretending to be low-level men, and they could at the very least get to the bottom rung of what it is to be a man, and so could be a man and then do whatever they want by following the basic tenets of Nietzschean philosophy. And this, by the way, through my study, I would say this is the core ideology behind all feminism that came about for the last, at least 100 years and is still here today. You have women, you have to turn them into men, and you have to take men and you have to feminize them so that women can become men. And one little sidebar to that to note is that when these women became men and engaged in this Nietzschean philosophy, they too had to see traditional women as the enemy, as less than slime of the earth, as something to be almost eradicated. Now, let's go over to comics and see where we can find this, because there is a prototype of this right there in comics, and it is Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel from 2012. Now, there was a recent podcast that Stephen Wacker and Kelly Sue DeConnick, the two creators of this character in 2012, did that shows exactly them doing this. Because they had to take a character who was Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, and they basically created a new character with Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, because they said that, well, you take her look and it's problematic. You take her costume and it's problematic. Well, a costume itself is problematic. They had to turn it into a uniform, in their words. They looked at her history, it was problematic. They looked at her personality, and it was problematic. Therefore, they had to change all of those things. And when you change all of those things, that's a new character. So they were creating a new character. And Kelly Sue DeConnick wanted to focus this character on her Air Force background, because Kelly Sue DeConnick grew up as a military brat. And she thought, well, she's going to take Carol Danvers and revamp her and make her character centered around her Air Force career. And she also wanted to take the character and make her more realistic. So what her intent was to look at Air Force and other military personnel, female military personnel, try to take one of them, or a conglomeration of a couple of them, and put them into this character and make them the actual basis for this character. But she had a bit of a problem. When she went into those historical archives to find all of these women in the military, she didn't like any of them. She didn't want to use any of them. So what did she do? She said, well, I looked at men instead. And what she said in the podcast was, and hey, why not? And the thing is, that little statement of, and hey, why not? That's a statement of the erasure of the man-woman divide, because she is a self-declared feminist. She is someone who truly believes that there is absolutely no difference whatsoever between a man and a woman, and that you can take a man and turn them into a woman, and you can take a woman and turn them into a man. That little statement of, and hey, why not? That is exactly what she is declaring with that tiny little statement. And then what did she do? Well, she looked for a good historical figure to base this character on, a male historical figure. And who did she choose? Well, she chose Chuck Yeager. And how definitive is this? Well, this is how definitive it is. The actual working title of how she sold this idea to Marvel through Stephen Wacker was the working title of Carol Danvers as Chuck Yeager. That was her title that she wanted to create this character under. So, I've pulled up a picture of Chuck Yeager for you. Now, he doesn't look like a bad fellow. Kind of rough and tumble, a little old and gristled, and he's an Air Force pilot, and he's considered to be a pioneer of aviation. A great guy, all in all. But the thing is that you want to take this guy and shove him into the skin of Carol Danvers? Because that's literally what she did to create Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel. She took this guy and just shoved him into the skin of Carol Danvers. And what comes out the other end when you do that? Well, what comes out the other end is Carl Manvers. And it's not just us anymore making fun of this. This is her declaring that this is what she did. She took this man, shoved him into the skin of a woman, and then created Captain Marvel. She is Carl Manvers. She is a man in the skin of a woman. And it all goes back to this philosophical change that I just talked about. And if you look at other aspects of how this character was created, how her stories are laid out, how the people who run Marvel view this character, and what she is supposed to represent for Marvel, you will see this philosophy poking up its head over and over again. Captain Marvel is and has been declared by Marvel as the strongest hero there is. She is Earth's mightiest hero. And they continue to say she's not Earth's mightiest female hero, she's Earth's mightiest hero. She has more power than anyone else on Earth. And what does she do with this power? Well, she basically does whatever it is she wants. Before the movie came out, they were asking a whole bunch of people that worked for Marvel, saying, how would you describe Captain Marvel, the character, in a couple of words? And over again, these two phrases kept popping up. 1, she is powerful. 2, she is unapologetic. And this is what the character is for Marvel. She is unapologetic power. That's what the character is based upon. And that's how her stories actually lay out. You know, if you know some of the storylines for Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel, she set up an illegal prison which imprisoned not just criminals, but also innocent people. And has she ever paid for that? No, she has not. She has caused the death of other characters, foes and friends alike, if you look at the character of Rhodey. And has she ever paid for any of that whatsoever? No, she has not. It doesn't matter that she does these things, because she is the most powerful. She has the power, the will to power, to ignore these small things like the rules, like the law, like morality. She doesn't need to pay attention to any of those things whatsoever. Now let's look at a couple of other characters. Let's look at Kate Bishop's Hawkeye. I always go back to Kate Bishop's Hawkeye because she's a great example of all of these problems with comics right now. You have the original Hawkeye. The original Hawkeye was a hothead. He was a guy which was always flying off the handle. He wanted to take control of every situation. He wanted to be in charge. He was a man's man, and he was in people's faces all of the time. But if you look at Clint Barton, the original Hawkeye, in the new Hawkeye comics, or in the West Coast Avengers comics now, what does he look like? Well, he's a pansy. That's what he is. Why? Because he's set next to the new Hawkeye, who is a woman. And you have Kate Bishop, Hawkeye. She has done nothing to deserve the title of Hawkeye. She's a Mary Sue-like character. Everything, just by happenstance, works out fine for her. Nothing ever really gets in her way that she can't handle, because the world warps around her to make sure that she always comes out on top. And in order to make her as masculine as possible, what they did was they took this old man's man, who was Clint Barton Hawkeye, set him next to her and feminized him to the point where he actually looks like the woman and she actually looks like the man. Let's look at America Chavez for a minute, and how she was there to help destroy the old idea of what Captain America actually is. Because America Chavez, who, by the way, is a lesbian, so there you go, you already tried to make her the man in the situation, but you have the character of America Chavez, and she is so strong that she punched a hole through time. And I gotta say, that is some really great writing there. She is so powerful that she's able to punch a hole through time. So what did she do with this power? Well, she decided to punch a hole through time so she could go back to World War II and punch Hitler in the face just before Captain America was able to do so. Why? Because, of course, Captain America is a Nazi now. That old Captain America, not the new one that has been recreated by the Cosmic Cube. No, she had to go back and make sure that someone proper actually punched Hitler in the face. That was her. And it all ties in with, so she was the one who actually punched Hitler in the face, not Captain America. So if you want to look at Marvel's history, she's now the one who's done that, and she's the one that you have to look towards, because now she's the man. She was, I'm sure, intended by Marvel to take over the position of Captain America in the minds of comic readers as the apex representation of America. And so, long story short, why do they have to take these women characters and turn them into men? Why do they have to take these traditional male forms of expression like comics and either subvert them or try to destroy them? Why? Because they need to be able, as women, to turn themselves into men, and in order to do so, they have to feminize men at the same time. And it's all done so that they can be as immoral as possible and live according to nothing more than, this is what I want to do at this particular point in time. And with such people controlling the creation of comics and comic stories, this is yet just another reason why we no longer have heroes in our superhero comics. So, If I've given you anything new to think about, hit like. Hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.